Hello, Richard from budgetguitarist.com. I thought it would be cool to make a video about price comparisons now that we're in 2024, like go all the way back to 2004 and compare prices from then to now. So let's talk about guitar prices over the past 20 years. How do the big companies compare to each other? We're talking Epiphone, Fender, Gibson, PRS, and Squier. This is a lot of text, so I'm just going to read it to you. I use prices from sweetwater.com using the Wayback Machine compared to this today, which is January. And I know that's 19 and a half years, but I mean, close enough. This is not like a Princeton, I'm not doing this for Harvard. So in 2004, $100, that translates to today about $166. So I use 66% as an estimate what current values should be. If you want to do your own comparison, use the Wayback Machine like I did. This is not super scientific because building techniques and parts, etc., are going to be different. And when an exact model is no longer made, I chose a close model. So let's get going. So which brands are increasing in prices and which brands are decreasing prices? What would you care to venture to guess? You might be surprised, actually. Let's get into it. All right, we're going to start with the Epiphone. This is Epiphone SG. In 2004, it was called the G400, but you can see what it is. It's a standard Epiphone. In 2004, this was $360. Now, adjusted for inflation, that'd be about $598 today. What does Epiphone sell it for? Sell it for $499. So that's a price decrease. Now again, and I'm not going to keep repeating this, I'm just going to repeat it once. I'm not talking about the quality of the workmanship or the quality of the parts. In some cases, the parts are better. Workmanship, all that stuff can be debated. Okay, no more disclaimers. Onward. Les Paul Custom. This is a beautiful looking guitar, isn't it? This was $600 in 2004. Kind of a lot of money. Adjusted for today, that would be $996. And what do they actually sell it for? $799. So again, price decrease. Epiphone, at least on these particular models, is doing a good job of not jacking up their prices. Let's look at the Epiphone Les Paul Standard. So in 2004, this was $500. Adjusted for inflation, that's $830 today. Today is Epiphone Les Paul Standard, about $699. So once again, we see price decreases. So let's not pretend that Epiphone's jacking up prices. Actually, these are decreases adjusted for inflation. And finally, the slab body. In 2004, they sold this thing for $200. Today, that'd be $332. Today's actual cost is around $200. So that's a decrease. But I did want to note, this is the satin version, $199. They do sell like a glossy version for a little under $400. So, we're comparing apples and oranges. Now let's get into Fender. Fender basic intro level American Stratocaster, not the Highway 1, the American Strat. In 2004, it was $865. Adjusted for inflation, that's $1,436. The actual cost is $1,700. Which means Fender has increased prices on the American Strat. All right, let's look at some other stuff. The Telecaster, 2004, $800. Adjusted for inflation, that's $1,328. And what are they charging? $1,400. So that's a price increase, but let's be fair, it's pretty small. Okay. The Fender American Highway 1, Strat or Tele, sold for $600 in 2004. So this was a satin body, like no frills American guitar. And they were really good instruments. Adjusted for inflation, Fender should be able to sell a Highway 1 for about $996. An American-made Strat for just under $1,000. About 5 years ago they did. But nowadays, they don't have Highway 1 anymore. There's no American options for under $1,000. I think this is a mistake, but just my opinion. So you would call that an increase. Now, the standard made in Mexico Stratocaster or Telecaster. Here's where things get interesting. In 2004, this was $350 for either one. Adjusted for inflation, that's about $581. And what is the entry level made in Mexico Strat or Tele these days? It's the Players series, and it sells for about $800. Forgot the dollar sign there. This is what I'm talking about. I think if the Player was around $650 or even $699, I think that would be more reasonable. They definitely jacked up the price on this, and in my opinion, Fender is missing out. There's a market of people who are looking at around that $600 price range. And again, just my opinion, but I think I can argue Fender has increased their prices more than most other companies because the numbers don't lie. So let's talk about Gibson. Let's look first at the Gibson Les Paul Classic. Okay, so 2004 price, $1,650. Quite a bit of money back then. Adjusted for inflation, that should sell for around $2,739. It actually sells for $2,800. So you would call that a price increase, but let's be fair, it's pretty small. However, this guy, Gibson Les Paul Double Cutaway, the price in 2004 was $620. Adjusted for inflation, it's a little over $1,000, $1,029. Gibson sells it for $1,600 now. Sweet Christmas. That's ridiculous. I'm sorry. That is definitely a big price increase for no reason, in my opinion. Anyway, Gibson Les Paul Standard, the flagship. In 2004, this was $2,000. Nice round number. Adjusted for inflation, $3,320. What does it sell for? Around $3,000. Now that is a price decrease, which kind of surprised me, but hey, numbers don't lie. So then we have the Les Paul Studio, and I remember when these came out. In 2004, you were looking at about $1,250. And adjusted for inflation, that is $2,075. What did they sell for? They sell for about $1,700. So guess what? That's another price decrease. Good job, Gibson. And then finally, for the Gibsons, we're going to look at the Gibson SG Standard. Now, in 2004, this was a little over $1,000, $1,150. Adjusted for inflation, it's almost $2,000. It's $1,909. What do they sell it for? $1,800. So that is definitely a price decrease. By the way, when I say what do they sell it for, I'm talking about Sweetwater, but really, Sweetwater's prices are going to be based on a certain markup from Gibson's prices, what it costs them from Gibson. So you see what I'm saying. PRS. All right, talk about tricky. In 2004, the PRS Custom 24 on the Sweetwater website said, call for prices. I spent a lot of time online trying to find out what did a PRS Custom 24 sell for in 2004. The best guess I could come up with is around $3,000. I'm not satisfied with this number. So check the comments section. Somebody might have a better source of data. But in the meantime, we'll go with that. That would mean that a Custom 24 would be $4,980. And if you get the least blingy model of the Custom 24, American made, it's around $4,000. So we got to call that a price decrease, probably. All right, continuing. The PRS SE Santana, the least expensive PRS SE guitar, back in 2004, $660. These days, adjusted for inflation, it'd be a little over $1,000. But guess what? PRS sells the SE Santana for $819, and the cheapest price I could find on Sweetwater for a PRS SE was actually $699. So at least with the SE line, PRS has decreased prices when adjusted for inflation. Squier, I'm a big Squier fan. The Squier Standard Strat was the one model that I could find that was like back then and is also today. So in 2004, the Standard Strat was $200. Adjusted for inflation, that's about $332. And Squier sells a Standard Strat for $470. So guess what? Price increase. So Fender and Squier seem to raise prices. Epiphone, PRS, and Gibson seem not to, for the most part. And then just for reference sake, the Shure SM57 may be the world's most popular microphone. In 2004, it sold for $90. And adjusted for inflation, that'd be $149 these days. But on the Sweetwater website, it's $99. So adjusted for inflation, that's a decrease. And that's just for reference. So what kind of conclusions can we draw from this dubious study? Well, you have to adjust for inflation, obviously, which I did. Epiphone prices decreased. Fender prices increased. Now, Fender likes to say that they add features. So, for example, the 2004 standard made in Mexico Strat came with ceramic pickups. If you buy one now, you're going to get Alnico 5 pickups. And most people would agree that that's a feature increase. But quite frankly, just saying Alnico 5 doesn't say much. You can get Alnico 5 pickups dirt cheap from China. So we're not really, we don't really know, right? Are the MIM Fenders better now than they were 20 years ago? I personally, in some ways, yes. In some ways, I don't know. Okay, Gibson, some of the prices increased, some of them decreased, right? PRS price decreased, Squier price increased. So, yeah, and Shure, yeah, okay. So now, I kind of hinted at this a second ago, but the elephant in the room, so to speak, is the quality. 20 years ago, PRS made the SE line in South Korea at World Musical Instruments. These days, they've got their own factory in Indonesia that I don't know which company over there is actually running the thing, but it's a dedicated factory that does only PRS SE stuff. You could certainly have a debate about quality. You could debate the quality of the Squiers and the Fenders and the Gibsons and all this stuff compared to 20 years ago. I think that opinions are going to be all over the map. This was just a fun exercise. But any way you slice it, I feel justified in saying I think Fender's gone too far with the price hikes. Now, having said that, and I think I'm probably going to mention this in the outro, I own guitars by all these companies, and I like them all. I wouldn't hesitate to buy a Fender Strat under some circumstances. But I think the Squier price hikes have increased, but I think people are okay with it. Maybe the MIMs, though, the made in Mexico, I do think that they're just beyond budget reach right now. I think it's a mistake. Okay, anyway, that's the end of this presentation. So there you go. If you ask me, I think that the made in Mexico Fender stuff is too expensive these days. I think that they made slight improvements to the product and they jacked up the prices in comparison to the competition. I do realize that this stuff is extremely subjective. So it's just my opinion. But I still love Fender. I still love Squier. Obviously, I just bought this recently, and I'm not making any statements about whether they're a good company or a bad company. Obviously, I still support them. But what I did want to do is just put some data out there. So I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider subscribing, and I will see you again on some future Friday at 5.